Welcome to the first installment of our series entitled The Gateway to the World of the Analytic Paper. What is the gateway here? The gateway. It's the thesis. This is the thing that we care about here. And what is the thesis? Well, if you ask that question, you probably get an answer like this. The thesis is the overarching claim of the paper. Now, if you're in the field, you understand all this stuff related to writing papers, you're looking at this definition and saying, yup, this is technically correct. That is precisely what a thesis is. But if you're unclear or somewhat unsure about this whole paper writing process, you're probably looking at this definition and it's not very meaningful. Probably confused by it. Specifically, you're probably asking yourself, well, what do we mean by an overarching claim in this context? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at here the definition of a claim. Well, a claim is asserting that something is the case, and typically without providing evidence or proof. So we see that this definition really has two parts to it. The first being to assert that something is the case. So imagine, for instance, me and you are stuck in the woods, we're walking around, scared, and all of a sudden I start screaming, hey, wait! There is a bear right behind this tree. It's waiting for us, it's going to eat us. And you're looking at me, and man, relax, man, we're going to be all right. I'm like, no, we're not. Well, in that case, what am I doing? I'm asserting that something is the case, but I haven't yet provided any evidence or any proof. Or another example will be this. Here you have Michael Jordan shooting his last shot in the finals. And I am this person who just can't stand Michael Jordan. I hate him. I hate everything about him. So in the finals, the last shot, the crowd is going crazy. And here I am looking at it, turning to you and saying, what? Man, Michael Jordan is going to miss this shot. I guarantee you that. With that bitter voice. And again, what am I doing here? Well, do we know if he's going to make it or not? Well, we know he actually did. But in that particular moment, we don't. So I'm simply asserting. I'm saying that something is the case. And lastly, maybe a spaghetti lover, and I say to you, spaghetti tastes better than hamburgers. And again, here I'm making a claim without evidence. So in this case, we see in this assertion absent evidence or proof, right? So when we're thinking about a thesis, then we want to think along these lines. We're saying that a thesis is to assert something, but the thesis itself does not yet provide the evidence or proof. So that means when we think about this particular example with the spaghetti being better than hamburgers, well, that is our thesis. That is the claim that we're making. Right? But of course, that's not all that you're doing in the paper. I mean, you're not just throwing out claims and saying, that's a nice paper, I'm so smart, I'm so good. No. Yes, the thesis itself may not be providing evidence or proof, but we very much care about evidence and proof. In fact, that's one of the key things that you're doing here. But the evidence and proof is not found in your thesis, but it's found in your paper instead. And so you can see that the thesis is telling us something about the paper. Now, to really appreciate just how important the thesis is, we want to go beyond just asking what it is. That is simply an overarching claim. But instead, we want to ask the question, well, why do we care? Why do we even care about this thing called the thesis? What's the point? Well, generally speaking, we care about your thesis because it helps us understand your paper. It does that in multiple ways. First of all, it tells us what the paper is about. Am I trying to convince you that there's a bear in the back of those trees? What is the paper about? Your thesis helps us understand that. Second, and this is critical, the entire series is making this point, and that is you have got to convince your reader of the point that you're trying to make. That is what your thesis is telling us. It's telling us what it is that you're trying to convince us of. And that convincing, well, that's the primary activity that you're going to be engaged in. And then third, in this process of convincing, by way of your thesis, well, we know, or we can evaluate, we can understand how you go about doing the convincing and how well you do it. So in that sense, your thesis is critical. It helps us understand the paper, but it does way more than that. And for that, I want you to join me on this little story of mine. And in that story, you grew up in Chicago. And not just that, you are the inventor of the Chicago deep dish pizza. You're the one who did it. And you're proud of it. In fact, we have a little description, and we see the deep dish pizza. It differs from the regular pizza in that, for instance, at the top, rather than having cheese, it has sauce. The crust is much thicker. The cheese tends to be in the middle. Right? And this concoction, this thing that you created, I mean, you are super proud of it. Now, walking around, you're happy. In one of those days, you walk across your friend, an old friend of yours from high school. And you give each other hugs and hey man, how you doing? How's life? Pretty good. Blah, blah, blah. You know, all that good conversation. And then in the middle of the conversation, all of a sudden your friend says what? Man, you won't believe what happened. You're like, what? Man, I was in Germany. He's like, oh, you're in Germany? Yeah, man. Yeah, good time? Yeah, it was great. Definitely great. But, here's the thing, man. Here's the kicker. He's like, what? Man, I was in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm walking around just minding my business. And next thing I see is this restaurant. And you know what they were serving? What? Bratwurst? Nah, man. They were serving deep dish pizza. What? Deep dish pizza? Yeah, I couldn't believe it myself. Look, I took a picture. Check this out. What? They're making deep dish? No way. Must be an imposter. How dare they? How dare they take my invention? And you know what? You don't even care about you being the only one. The thing you care about is that your invention is being made with quality. And you worry that, well, over there, they're probably just making a cheap knockoff. So now you're skeptical. What are you going to do? Well, the only thing you can do, you making your way to the airport. Taxi! I need a ticket to Germany, please. Willkommen in Frankfurt, Deutschland. Enjoy your stay in Germany. You don't even check in the hotel. The first thing you do is you go straight to the restaurant. Taxi! Guten Abend. Hier ist der Menu. Deep dish pizza, deep dish pizza, deep dish pizza. Aha, here it is. Okay, I'm gonna go with the numero uno. That's the one I'm gonna pick. Let me see if you're for real. Let's stop for a moment. Let me ask you, if you are that person who invented the deep dish pizza, who came all the way from Chicago, 4,000 miles, hasn't even checked into the hotel yet, when you look at this menu, are you going to be looking at this menu as just simply a description of the food in the restaurant? I'd venture to say no. In fact, you're going to be skeptical, right? You probably have your hands crossed, your eyebrows indicating suspicion. Right? When you're looking at this menu, you're seeing what? You're seeing nothing but acclaim. You're saying to yourself, well, okay, Germans, I see you can write words on a paper. Woohoo, good for you. But can you make the actual deep dish pizza? Right? So you're looking at this menu item as just nothing but a claim. You haven't shown me any proof or any evidence. So you're going to be suspicious. In other words, the menu item is a thesis. So then, how can the restaurant prove that they actually can live up to their thesis, to their claim? Well, that happens where? Well, it happens in the back. The chef, the execution. The chef has to do the baking and the cooking and then show that, in fact, what they did in the kitchen is able to match what they said they're going to do according to the menu. And so here you are, you've placed your order, and they come back and they give you this. What are we going to do? You're probably looking at this, you're saying to yourself, what? All right, it looks good. It may taste great, right? But guess what? That's not what I ordered. Please take it back. And so, okay, apologize. They come back and they bring you this. Okay. I guess it's round. That's a step forward. And for those of you who don't know, quick digression, this is called injera. It's a food eaten in East Africa and parts of Eritrea and Ethiopia. If you haven't had it, it's pretty tasty. But unfortunately, for our purposes, I'm sorry, but that's not what we ordered. And so they go back, they apologize and say, okay, must be language differences. So they come back with this, and you're looking at this, now you're really confused. Like, all right, I guess it's round. It may even be a deep dish pizza. But what's the problem? It is burned. I mean, you came 4,000 miles to eat burnt pizza? You could have had that anywhere else. That doesn't take a skill. In other words, what you're seeing here is what? A terrible execution of the menu. It's a terrible execution of what they claim they're going to make. And so it's not until the fourth try, they apologize again, and then eventually they come and bring out this. You're looking at this and you're like, oh, okay, Germans, not bad. Not bad. You taste it, you say, you know what, that's pretty good. So you go back in the kitchen and you give a big hug for the chef and, say to them, you know what? This is not a knockoff. You did a great job. I can now go back to Chicago, put myself at ease, knowing that wherever they make Chicago deep dish pizza, they're doing it the right way. Now let's take a step back. What is sort of the moral of the story here? What has happened here? Why is it relevant to writing an analytic paper? There actually are profound similarities here. So if you look at the menu item on the left, you can see, in this case, that it was way more than just a description of the food. Right? That instead, it was our guide. By way of the menu item, we were able to understand what they were bringing out to us, in the sense that we were able to judge, evaluate. Say, for instance, in the first two, that they may taste great, but simply it doesn't match what we ordered. That is something completely different. And for the one on the bottom left, well, we were able to recognize that, yes, you may be in the sort of same ballpark, but it's a terrible execution of what you said you're going to do in the menu. And lastly, it was also through the menu that we were able to finally conclude the point at which we successfully matched the claim with what was actually done. Again, we would not have been able to do that had we not access to the menu item. And so you can see that there's this profound relationship between the thesis, or in this case the menu item, and the chef's meal. It's this relational aspect that makes the menu so crucial. Now for the paper, all we're going to do is we're going to go and change this right here, the menu item. We're going to call it your thesis. Okay? That's all we're going to do. Notice, the thesis serves the same function. We understand the thesis by way of what is being executed. So that means on the right, instead of the chef's meal, what we have is the body of your paper, where we find the evidence and proof, your logic, all of those things that you are now constructing in order to illustrate or convince your reader that your claim indeed was true, that it had value, right? And so that is how we want to understand the thesis in relationship to the paper. And you can see in this relational aspect that the thesis is profoundly important. So if we look at it in terms of the paper, we see that, for instance, the claim, the thesis, it serves as the guiding map. It signals the overarching argument. We know, as we said before, well, what is it that you're claiming? What is it that we're going to be looking for? Second, it's a reference to evaluate the arguments. Just as we did with the menu item, as the meals were being brought out to us, we were able to evaluate. Well, the same thing goes for your paper. Third, it also allows us to understand and evaluate, well, the evidence. What kind of evidence are you providing in your paper? And the same thing here. Without the thesis, it's difficult to assess the evidence that you're providing. And lastly, just as we did with the menu item and the pizza when it finally matched, right? Your thesis is the thing that we're comparing your work, your paper to. So that means it is by comparing those two that we finally are able to identify the point at which you successfully match what you said you're going to do with what you actually did. So here you have it. Now you can see that the thesis is much more than just the overarching argument. In fact, it is just deeply important to the paper that you're writing. It is a critical piece, right? And so when you think about the thesis then, really think about these 2 points. That the thesis is what you set out to convince your reader of. I cannot stress the word convince enough, and you'll see in the next couple of videos, in fact the entire series, that term convincing is critical, okay? And then secondly, the thesis is the guiding map to understand the paper. So it's those two when you're thinking about the thesis. So with that, thank you for watching. I'll see you next video.